a direct order, ignored any and all ROE, and endangered your entire fire team. But at least you caught him. Is that right? 3 years of planning, waiting, countless millions of taxpayer dollars, invested lives on the line, day in, day out, and you go and do this? Who the hell do you think you are anyway, hotshot? Acting like this is some goddamn mindless PlayStation car crash video game. PlayStation car crash video game. PlayStation car crash video game.
Like Burnout? In 2006, a little British studio by the name of Criterion released the greatest first-person shooter of all time. But it didn't start there, it started a few years before. It started with some goddamn mindless PlayStation car crash video game. It started with Burnout.
If you can see it, you can shoot it. Words immortalized by the father of Canadian photojournalism, Ted Grant, and a phrase that managed to instill an urge for exploration in young photographers for decades to come. If you can see the beauty of our world, why not capture it? Why not treasure it? Why not share it? Through the tactile act of pressing the shutter button, hearing it close, and winding the film, the act of eternalizing a memory is something that today is often overlooked because of its prevalence, but its introduction changed humankind forever. At the tail end of Mr. Grant's career, however, the analog photography he'd grown up with was fighting a losing battle. 35mm film was being thrown out, getting replaced by affordable, easy-to-use consumer digital cameras, and for the purists, it started to smell like the end of the medium.
So if the medium ended, why are we talking about cameras when we set out to discuss, well, this? Turns out, it comes down to business.
In a technology environment rapidly changing, what made you successful doesn't necessarily guarantee you retirement unless it manages to keep up with the changing tides. Sometimes you might be better off to cast a wide net covering any available bases, and sometimes, just in order to see what sticks, you might just try firing it out of maybe not a company most of us associate with video games, but in the 90s, for the small British studio they started, a couple certainly did. In a bid to establish a multimedia spanning business model and increase its capabilities both in the second and third dimension of computer graphics, camera giant Canon founded Criterion Software, and within the year reached massive success with what later developed into the industry juggernaut in their renderware engine.
Canon's little experiment had pulled through. They continued to develop their product until they had a full-fledged game engine on their hands, and with that, a game was needed to shop it around the industry. An internal demo rumored to have been named Shiny Red Car was chosen, and in 2001, the world got its first taste of Burnout. Turns out, if you can see it, well, you can crash it.
Burnout's offering of chaotic racing was at first glance not a revolutionary effort for the industry, or even within the PlayStation library itself, which had seen the success of its own Twisted Metal for over a generation. But where Burnout managed to stand out was where it focused that effort. The crowning jewel of the PlayStation ecosystem was very much the Gran Turismo we still know and love to this day. A racing series that, while not being an outright simulator, at the time it was the first time many players had ever had to consider tire wear and oil changes for their pretend race cars. And they loved it. So when Burnout came out on a new, untested engine, and instead of telling you to carefully push your tuned-up Civic Type R around Trial Mountain, it instead screamed in your face and told you to never worry about the brake pedal. It did so in a way that was basic, rudimentary, and very, very simple. But that's not where the effort went. Every single ounce of that went into making sure it was fun.
Makes, models, engine, displacement numbers don't matter if all you're doing with your cars is crashing them. The problem was, in the original Burnout, you needed to actually finish the races, and you don't finish a hell of a lot of races wrapped around your neighbor's Chevy Tahoe. So in the eventual sequel and the genre-defining third entry, the crashes that made us pick up the game to begin with were made crucial for progression.
This game rocks.
Progression for Criterion doesn't mean the same thing as what we've been taught, however. I remember me and my friend taking turns lapping our beat-up Mercedes CL600 in Gran Turismo 3 just to be able to afford our dream Pagani Sonda. But in Burnout, well, what you're doing hour 1 is beat for beat what you're doing hour 200. But that's not what's special. The fact that so many of us got to hour 200 is.
Through the subsequent entries refining the very essence of the series but always dialing in the dopamine as the single driver of the experience. Criterion's newfound success soon found them under new management. Globe-spanning Megacorp EA acquired the small British outfit in 2004, but just as the new car smell of The Office started to spread, something else started to feel stale. Criterion was now established, Burnout a staple of the console market, and the latest outings heralded as masterpieces. So the aim shifted. Criterion had done other games, but never to the extent that they had with the car crash variety. And they desperately wanted to.
Criterion were confident. They knew how to make a fun video game. They understood that if you made even the most disappointing moment of crashing your car into a freeway divider at least engaging, you've got a good thing going. So when they pitched the idea of an FPS to EA, they did so with the intent to do for shooting what Burnout did for racing. And maybe by pure coincidence or as a subtle homage to their founders, plastered all over the marketing were those gilded words. If you can see it, well, you can shoot it. But in black, if you shoot it, good luck ever finding it again.
2-1 standby, I think I got something. Bad news, I got tracks all over the place, fresh. Maybe platoon size plus in strength.
Copy. Let's not get caught sleeping.
And maybe they're getting ready for a garage sale.
Stay down, I think we got movement.
What if I don't mind that?
The year was 2006, a couple of months after the release of the highly anticipated Xbox 360, ushering in the next generation of consoles. A generation that already on launch day had managed to stun audiences with the leap in graphical fidelity. But Criterion's blockbuster shooter was not for the new generation. Black was wholly developed for and firmly cemented in the previous one. And in February of 2006, with EA's monstrous marketing funding behind it finally released.
Publications and magazines had ads and banners all over the place trying to sell you on a last generation title, while Call of Duty 2 was dominating the sales charts. But the thing is, they kinda did. Reviewers spoke of a spectacle unlike many others with high-quality effects throughout, and due to the large install base of the PS2 and original Xbox, it started selling well.
The tail end of any console's lifespan usually sees the most impressive titles released. The PS3 had God of War and The Last of Us, and the PS4 God of War and The Last of Us, but the PS2 saw an evolution of graphical and effect fidelity unlike any before it. The journey from NHL 2001 to God of War was hard to believe having taken place over a single hardware generation, but in the twilight years of the PS2, certain developers knew the system's ins and outs like the back of their hands, and they didn't mind showing it off. This game is it's strangely beautiful.
3, this is 2-1. RV
And
is
loud.
plant.
And loud also, apparently.
Copy
Black was a good-looking video game. I'd argue it still is to this day, not just by PS2 standards, but the sheer visual presence it demanded rivaled experiences, taking up many times the processing power. So if Criterion had to make a deal with the devil to blow the competition out of the water when it came to visual fidelity, maybe it's not so weird that when people finally got to play it, many of them felt like compared to that competition, there was a little bit of a lack of content.
Online multiplayer had been a staple of the PC community for years, with titles often solely relying on the social aspect to keep sales up. And while the original Xbox had pioneered its live service and the PS2 was fully network capable with its multitap, the newly released 360 had taken it to new heights, truly ushering in the online experience for the masses. So when Black released not just without online compatibility but lacking any form of multiplayer mode to speak of, it seemed regressive. This, coupled with a measly 8 levels, taking just over 5 hours to beat and without much of any driving narrative to speak of, the game that in the marketing looked like the next big thing slowly started to disappoint.
For a game that had bragged about creatives from the TV series 24 having directed the cutscenes, hearing the story was next to non-existent. I was worried. I remember reading reviews and opinionated blog posts stating that the game, from a narrative perspective, was not much evolved from Criterion's previous arcadey franchise. The negatives were mounting up. No multiplayer, no story, and a meager 6 hours of content on its medium difficulty. Was this why EA had bought Criterion? For them to develop an underperforming shooter for a console nearing its deathbed?
No, because as soon as you actually start playing Black, that quote that started it all comes back to you. They didn't pour effort into revolutionizing the gaming industry. They set out to do for shooting what Burnout had done for racing. In Burnout, the effort went into nothing superfluous. The cars had to be fun to crash into a wall on their own. And in Black, the guns had to be fun to shoot in an empty room.
This is 2-5. We're pinned down. I have multiple casualties. Request priority medevac on my location. 5-1. This is 3-1. I'm on the other side of the block. I'm coming to you now. Over.
This is the room Black starts you in. The menus are all adorned with gun models ceremoniously being emptied, and the cutscene preceding this moment has flashbacks filled with gruesome violence, but the first time you're actually in full control, it's here, in an empty room. The gunshots of a distant battle echo from the streets beyond the dusty windows, just barely allowing the amber light of the morning sun through.
But in the room, there's nothing. Except the door and a shotgun.
This is how Black has you interact with doors. In a period of rapid game development, seeing massive corporations invest millions of dollars into extensively increasing the number of actions players had at their disposal, this is how Black has you interact with everything. If there's a door, wall, or window, truck blocking the road, or a barricaded city street, any form of bump in the road is dealt with by a single button. Any collectible is to be destroyed, trampled over, or is just another gun, and anything that moves or not is seemingly a valid target. Your single connection to the world around you is via your firearm, via a single button pulling a single trigger that has a single effect on anything. And about those firearms. Undoubtedly the stars of the show, Criterion did an incredible job making sure every single one of them felt like a worthwhile inclusion. From the tiniest of pistols to the world-ending RPGs and machine guns all throughout its arsenal, Black's weapons impact the world around you in a spectacular fashion. Explosions rock the streets, fully automatic rifles rinse walls completely bare of paint, and clouds of dust kick up from every shot hitting the scenery, soon filling even the most non-asthmatic charismatic people with shortness of breath. Everything feels powerful. Maybe even a little too powerful. Holy shit. Ubisoft had for years strived to emulate the reality of combat with their Ghost Recon and Rainbow Six series, and the groundbreaking Arma predecessor Operation Flashpoint had in 2001 started a new wave of true-to-life war is hell simulators, and to great commercial success. So when Black's Armory featured 9mm pistols that wreaked more havoc than even explosive launchers did in the competition, it was easy to see how the purist crowd grew skeptical. STANAG magazines are just that, standardized. And while they come in a variety of capacities depending on how much you want someone unalive, Black's interpretation of a 90-round box one is not only without roots in reality, but so wholly over-exaggerated that it's obscene. And it's proud of it.
Black's weapons are, at first glance, maybe just like any other on-screen depiction. It's not like the developers implemented space guns or laser rifles. These polygonal death machines all have real-world counterparts, all to make your journey as a Special Forces operator as real as possible. The problem is, these counterparts are often found in the toy section rather than on the battlefield.
90-round magazines aside, that's not the only thing off about the things Black puts front and center. The guns are based on real-world firearms from all over the world, but there's always something strange about them. Whether it's charging handles being out of place, models completely mirrored, or the spring-loaded magazines being sent flying out of the magwell anytime you hit the reload button. These are not issues singular to Black, with many developers only being able to rely on blurry reference photos or airsoft replicas to create their virtual weapons, and sometimes alterations are made just because it looks cooler. Mirrored guns have been a staple within the gaming community for ages. It just looks a lot more visually interesting when the weapon you're firing sends a stream of brass cartridges across your monitor. But Black takes that to the next level. The guns are wrong. If you're familiar with the models listed, often hilariously so, most likely due to the reference material reason already discussed, but instead of shying away from this fact and hiding the imperfections with animations or lighting, Black revels in them. Anytime you fire, a reminder of your destruction is sent flying across your field of view. Anytime you switch to another weapon, an elaborate animation covers a great part of it, and when you finally reach the end of that 90-round magazine, the game isolates you from the world, blurring everything but what is most important: your weapon, in all its incorrectness.
The game is ballsy. It's so exaggerated and over the top that it feels like what a 9-year-old would say if they were tasked with describing what their secret agent mom did over the weekend. But where the magic lies is that it knows that this is all that it is. It's so incredibly self-aware that you can't help but laugh along with it. But that's not all that it's doing.
When you fire up Black for the first time, you might think you've accidentally inserted the wrong DVD. Before you even enter that empty room with nothing but evil intent and a shotgun, you're treated to a near 6-minute unskippable intro credit cutscene. A cinematic featuring blaring orchestral scores and an interrogation scene rivaling TV's finest, and it does this without blinking for a moment. The game plays it so straight and takes itself so seriously that when you finally get to blast down that door, it feels like a liberation, not only from the physical constraints of that empty room, but from the shackles of exposition.
Copy that, 6-2.
This air of the game thinking it's the most important thing in the world doesn't stop until the last line of credits roll across your screen. Every line of dialogue is steeped in the most hard-boiled military lingo you can imagine.
Any call sign on this net. This is Bravo 3. Do you copy?
Characters unfazed by the mindless chaos going on around you, and collectibles detailing Black operation references in the real world.
Look the game in the eyes and it'll stare back with a deathly glare. It's convinced it's dead serious. But crack a smile and it'll smirk back. It knows it's fun.
Black is like the final boss of PS2 shooters. In an industry trend that saw games grow darker and grayer by every installment, just titling your game Black is like a sick joke. But it's a joke its developers are in on, and they desperately want you to be in on it as well.
Your team was ordered back after the mission. McCarver convinced you otherwise?
Yes.
You had nothing to do with it.
Yes. I mean, no. You're fucking with me.
The game lets you make fun of it. It wants you to because it knows it can take it, contrasting serious topics with explosions rivaling cartoons. The game puts all of its effort into providing a gameplay sandbox, letting you destroy as much of the environment as you can see, just for you to feel like the most unstoppable combat machine. But when you're out of bullets, the game takes you out of that carnage, blurs all your effort, and forces you to look at your accomplice. That destruction might not be as comprehensive or wholesale as the Bad Company one that many people associate with destructible shooters, but to achieve this a whole generation before, never having it feel like a gimmick and still impressing to this day, is remarkable. The game also never shies away from letting you wreak as much havoc as you want. It desperately wants you to try and shoot anything you can see, just to see what happens. But when push comes to shove, medkits are removed on harder difficulties and you're tasked with completing more and more secondary objectives. All this destruction is contrasted by your own will to live. Holding down the trigger quickly fills any room with dust, allowing enemies to sneak around you. Indiscriminately throwing grenades is an easy way to get yourself an early retirement, and getting too entranced by the destruction might see you miss crucial collectibles. The game puts a playground before you, shows you how to lay waste to it, and then encourages you to hold back. But Black isn't taking you for a fool. It's not withholding any information from you. It knows you can figure out the most effective way of playing the game. But it also knows you won't do that. Because just like in Burnout, hitting apexes and avoiding traffic increases your chances of reaching the finish line first, but sometimes you just want to see your car crumpled into tiny little pieces as they careen off of a highway. And in Black, well, sometimes you just want to shoot off a couple of shots in an empty room.
Everything Criterion has done has been a tale of 2 points, a tale of 2 extremes, a tale of duality. The first renderware game, called Airblade, may have looked like a Tony Hawk's Pro Skater ripoff, but its story quickly grew darker than any Underground title ever tried. Their breakout hit in Burnout may have been lighthearted and fun, but its commitment to detail was rivaling real driving simulators. When they were told to reboot maybe the most loved entry in the Need for Speed franchise, they realized they couldn't please everyone and just went insane with it. And right in the middle of it all lies that little shooter. A game hyped to levels that it could not realistically reach with the ever-evolving industry. A game expected to sell PS2s in a world of PS3s. A game thought to be able to do it all, when all it wanted to do was do for shooting what Burnout did for racing.
I am motivated by narrative. If a game lacks a story to tell, whether it's through writing or emergent gameplay, I often couldn't care less about it. But if an interactive experience is filled with characters, their development, and has every design element pointed in the same direction, if I have to shoot the same bad guy 5,000 times in order to see it through, well, I'm gonna shoot them. Black's story is next to non-existent, with not a single moment of it told through gameplay. A set of well-directed, ultimately meaningless cutscenes string together a narrative that, at the end of it all, proves without resolution. A recipe for an experience I'm bound to hate. But I don't, because through the fact that it understands itself so well, I'm enthralled by it. Black knows it's ridiculous, but it never lets you in on that fact. Beating the game unlocks silver-coated weapons, and beating it again on hard gives you unlimited ammo and an underslung grenade launcher. But it never acknowledges this fact. It's still presented as the most grounded, serious military operation ever to take place.
5-1, this is Hammerhead 6-2. TOC advises streets barricaded to the north. We are circling around you to find an alternate route, over.
Copy that, 6-2.
In a games industry rapidly growing, seeing millions and billions of dollars invested into it every year, where companies desperately try to fulfill your childhood fantasy of being in the boots of a Tier 1 Special Forces operator, pulling out all the stops to make you see the most elaborate set pieces ever conceived, reaching over backward to try and create new ways for you to fight a faceless enemy. Minigames, turret sections, and cinematic quicktime events, anything to try and diversify your soldier experience. Just firing your weapon feels like a slog. But in Black, if I see it, all I can do is shoot it.
I should hate it. Black should have been a game I convinced my dad to buy on sale, played once, and forgot about, but it wasn't. I'm still playing it to this day. Those 6 hours on the medium difficulty turned into 6 more on hard, and further countless ones when the game just gave up and exchanged 90-round magazines for bottomless pockets. The title that set out to do for shooters what Burnout had done for racing is easy to dismiss as a failure because of the former still being re-released seemingly every other year and is playable on modern consoles. But the fact that Black, on its own, with all of its shortcomings, is still recent enough for me to power up my PS2 almost 20 years after the initial release has to mean something. I should hate it, but I don't, and I do.
You've been going after me how long and you don't get it? I'm you.
Was this why EA had bought Criterion? For them to create an underperforming shooter for a console nearing its deathbed? Oh my fucking lord. I'm gonna fucking become the Joker.